Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So it's a quite a difficult topic today, how charities track and manage zakat. So, before I go into this, just a bit about myself. Um, so everything that I'm going to say today, it's not theoretical. This is professional experience talking. So I've got 25 years of chartered accountancy experience. I'm a founder of Dua Governance Chartered Accountant. So this is my identity and passion. I have a very large charity client portfolio, large charities, new charities, all size. I've got mosques, I've got international relief. So I've also held senior executive positions within the Muslim charities. I'm the former Finance and Corporate Services Director of Islamic Relief Worldwide. So I was responsible for finance, HR, facilities, IT, also the chair of the trading operation. So I've got, hands-on practical experience on what issues charities face. My kind of background is PwC and KPMG. These are large accountancy firms, and in that I used to audit the government sector. So this is, where my best practice comes from. I then, did about 3 years in a FTSE 100 business, and this is what I gave up before coming back into this sector. And while I was, for the FTSE 100, I kind of saw the likes of Islamic Relief, 100 million plus, but from a governance point of view, I wasn't really convinced. And this is, my government sector experience was kicking, and this is what I basically then decided to do. I do write blogs. I've got things to say. Today, 2 o'clock, I had a radio interview with Unity FM to talk about 100% donations and Waqf and Zakat and all sorts. It's going to be quite an explosive interview during Ramadan, so it was a recording. So this is what my background is. Now, what's the objective today of this presentation? My objective is to create a debate and talk about things that are normally not spoken about, partly because, there are no professionals out there that will, talk about these things. These are often hidden and, completely missed. And then what I'm going to focus on is solutions. So this is not about, criticism, because criticizing is the easy bit. What I'm going to focus on is what's the solution? How do we fix, what went wrong? This is not a Sharia presentation, so I'm not going to be giving any fatwas or fiqh lessons. I will refer to, the zakat categories and things like this, but and I will talk about some of the Sharia debates that the donors would have. Now, what's right, what's wrong, that's not something I'm going to comment on. This is something that, you need to be aware of, and because each, argument has a implication on the charity. So what I'm going to do in this presentation, there's no technical jargon. This is not for finance experts or people who understand accountancy. These are, I'm going to use non-technical jargon. And if I do use something technical, please drop me and tell me off. And I will try to make sure that I can simplify, what I'm basically talking about. So zakat beneficiaries. So that's this. So what I'll do in this, I'll talk about the purpose of zakat, categories, the debates that happen, and what are the practical implications on this. So Surah Toba, talks about the zakat categories, and the Quranic verse translation is zakat expenditures. Zakat expenditures are only for the poor and for the needy, for those employed to collect zakat, and for bringing hearts together for Islam, and for freeing captives, and for those in debt, and for the cause of Allah, and for the stranded traveler, an obligation imposed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is knowing and wise. Scholars conclude that these categories ensure that the zakat uplifts and supports those in need, promoting social justice and economic balance in society. And what is the overall aim of this is reducing poverty, empowering disadvantaged individuals, and ensuring economic justice. Now, today on the radio, I was talking about this, and I gave an example of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So in UK government, the Chancellor of Exchequer, there will be a manifesto of the government. I will present a budget, and that budget is all about, the fiscal policy and the fiscal policy on how, the government plans to, change the country and lift those who are left out. And if I look at all these categories, the 8 categories that normally are mentioned, it's amazing. I mean, any government. So this is like a manifesto, a budget of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has basically given the global mankind. If every government set their budgets based on this, economically, it completely changes the world that we live in. So, the poor and needy, that's quite straightforward. The reconciliation of hearts, it's a society that becomes closer to God and God-fearing, freeing slaves or captives. And these are people that are, I mean, we see today Muslim countries, countries like Pakistan, Malaysia, Saudi Arabia, at government level, they have zakat systems, and they may be covering some of these activities at government level. But being in UK, every Muslim has to pay zakat, and it's through Muslim charities we fulfill this ibadah. And the things I've highlighted in yellow are the things that become relevant to us then in these 8 categories: the poor, needy, religious courses and education. And now the reason why I wanted to mention all these categories is I have clients, some of the largest Muslim convert organizations, and they're always struggling with money. And within our Muslim community, the converts are the most, I'll say, one of some of the most vulnerable people living in UK. And what we find is that, they may be subject to, their initiatives subject to zakat, but they're always struggling to raise funds. It's because the whole focus is on poor and needy, and we sometimes forget our home. And then majority of zakat is sent abroad. Locally, a trend has started, but still it's nowhere near. And then within our own society, those many in debt. We're not doing anything about that. Poor and needy locally, and that basically. So there's no strategic approach to this, and I spoke about this on the radio today, and I asked why is that the case, and that's probably a bigger a strategic leadership, organizations working together. But that's something that's missing. That's probably needed at some point. Now, what are the donor debates that you often find on this? Zakat is intended for Muslims. This is what the majority opinion is. Non-Muslims may also receive, but that's a minority opinion. And there are practicality issues. I came across one charity, a big charity, where they had an issue where they were working in countries where there was zakat eligible projects, but what they found was some of those projects were benefiting non-Muslims as well. And then the debate started. Well, could this be a zakat eligible project or not? And what that charity then did, they basically did an estimate based on data that we will not allocate 100% zakat on any one project, even the zakat eligible projects. And we will leave, say, we'll do 90% or 75%, and that 25% will leave room for non-Muslims benefiting from that project. But it was quite interesting to see, to kind of face this. But this is something that I saw as a debate. Fi sabilillah. Now, the cause of Allah. There's a huge. I was looking into this, and there's a huge list. It's a general nature to it. I mean, there's jihad. In the way of Allah fighting. Now, obviously, that's a sanctioned activity for us. To building a hospital, infrastructure projects, includes education, Quran printing, and dawah. And then, different scholars will have different opinions. But again, there's a wide range that charities can use. The third thing, individual versus institution. I came across this issue with one big charity that basically focuses on zakat. I mean, giving an individual, that's an easy one where you're given zakat and the capacity is built of that individual. But then there are institutions out there that build the capacity and support people who are zakat eligible. So, paying zakat to an institution, can it be to an institution or an individual? It has implications, and you can have this particular charity had a system whereby it was all individual focused, right? And because of that, they ended up having a big fraud on this. And I'll talk a bit more about that. And when I came in, and it was all I basically had to change the way they were doing things on this. That was an interesting local and abroad debate. And that this, probably 10, 15 years ago, there was locally was very little, but now this locally is increasing where local mosques are involved in distributing zakat, and this is something that's growing every year. And the last one is dawah. And I found this quite fascinating, where there are some opinions which talk about TV channels, right? They because well, not the Muslim TV channels, are all dawah focused. And there are arguments I've seen that can you fund the TV channel 100% using zakat funds. Now, these TV channels are private businesses, and people, their lifestyles kind of depend on that, and the whole kind of moral question on this. But I did find this fascinating. The debates show that there's no black and white answers to these, and there are grey areas, and this is why I'll talk about as a guard policy that as a charity, you need to clarify your position on what your position is, so the donors can make an informed choice on what kind of suits them on this. So sometimes it reminds me of, because I did a lot of work around the halal sector, of the stunned and non-stunned debate. And and this is worse than that. I would say that's only one issue, but there's so many issues, and each issue has a direct implication on this. Now, there's non-zakat projects. Mosque construction, majority view, this is zakat that cannot be applied to the non-Muslims, general sport, government expenses, business investments, political parties and campaigns, employee salaries are non-zakat workers, funeral and burials for wealthy families, government debt payments, supporting wealthy people. Now, the reason why I mentioned all this are, could be not-for-profit, not-for-profit activities, and charities can do some of this work, but zakat with some restriction. But zakat cannot be spent on this, and this is where and again, all of this, is something that we increasingly we see microfinance projects within charities. Funeral and burials. There's a lot of charities that I'm setting up at the moment that focus on funerals and burials, sometimes there are projects there that wealthy people can benefit, especially education. Wealthy people can benefit as well. So things like this that basically create some challenges and there are mosque construction projects. Sometimes there are mosques in really poor areas, and those mosques are not just praying places. These are community centers. And then the argument starts is that these mosques basically build the capacity of local people. They're able to get food from it and all sorts, and the discussions start on this. But generally within our sector, the ones that I've highlighted yellow are the ones that we basically come across. Okay, how zakat is tracked and managed. So I'll talk about income and spend, and I'll talk about the allocations, and I'll talk about some of the solutions on this. And I think what I will do through this is create some like debate. So zakat is collected through fundraising, and what we find now, especially after COVID, that more and more is done online, and cashless is growing. Even um, during mosques, the bucket is being replaced by those machines, and you just have to put your card on there, and a lot of it is going through online, which is good. Now, the legal restrictions that we have in UK is general versus restricted, and you all will be familiar with these. These are legal restrictions; they're not voluntary or good to have. If a charity is found to have not adhered to this, the Charity Commission takes this very, very seriously. Now, the thing that's most surprising in all this is that the card can be collected under both categories. And this can be very surprising to hear. And I've seen this in many occasions where zakat ends up in general reserves. Now, it becomes a general reserve, it's a moral restriction, because of the restricted reserves that the charity has, 90% or even 100%, they'll all be zakat eligible projects anyway. By going into the general reserve, it gives the charity the ability to spend the money on their chosen zakat eligible projects, which the auditors are happy with. There's absolutely no issue. For auditors, because obviously larger charities, our charities above £1 million, they get audited. Now, zakat is never on the auditor's mind. The auditor strictly uses general and restricted categories. The auditor is not concerned about the moral restriction about if something is zakat eligible or not zakat eligible. My experience with Muslim charities is that, when it comes to the audit, the systems and processes are not very like there's a lot of things that the auditor has to, and this thing going down to the level of zakat eligibility is that they'll never get to that. So you can't rely on your external auditor to be satisfied that your zakat funds are spent properly. Yes, if there's a zakat eligible project and you're raising money for that, what happens to the money that was raised against it? That's something that the auditors will look at. But your actual zakat is applied. For example, what's the internal system that you have that ensures that when the zakat comes, how the zakat is applied, and what the approval process is, how the risk of zakat ending up on non-eligible project is managed. That's not talked about in any of the policies. And the policies are more like a marketing document to convince the donor that we are a safe organization when it comes to zakat. Policy should be something that the trustees should be using to make sure that their organization knows what they are doing the right thing. So through the policy, the trustees are satisfied that if they are asked that, right, okay, how do you know your zakat is spent on zakat eligible projects? And the answer is, oh, we got a good chief executive in place, we got a finance person in place, and we expect them to do that. No, that's not the answer. The answer needs to be, and the trustees need to be able to give that answer intelligently, because at the end of the day, the buck stops with them. It's not a case where the buck stop doesn't stop with the finance manager or the chief executive. It's the trustees. It doesn't matter if your charity is £200 million or if your charity is £200,000. It's the trustees that have the ultimate responsibility, legal, moral, and Islamic responsibility. And again, if you look at the only with all the charities, if there's any third party independent scrutiny of any charity, it's your annual accounts, right? I mean, the fundraisers, they don't get annually audited by a fundraising regulator. Your program department, you don't have, unless you're, signing up to Safir standards. And not only Islamic Relief is probably the only charity, maybe one more, I think Actual Humanity as well. Only a couple of charities are the Safir standards, and you'll have Safir auditors coming in. Apart from that, there's no external scrutiny. The only scrutiny is your external audit. And I've seen this case where, like I've talking to a charity chief executive, and his whole focus was that, oh, we make a statement on our website. Well, you can say whatever you like on your website. That's not audited. If you make a statement in your audited accounts, then at least there's a third party looking at your accounts, and that has more credibility. And he was like downplaying the audited accounts. So, like that's something that, donors need to wise up as well. That if it's not in your annual accounts, if your annual accounts can't explain it, then any other explanation doesn't really hold any value, because that's just a marketing way of saying something. That's not something that you can say. And a lot of charities do that. In their accounts, they don't explain their overheads and how zakat is spent, but they do slick videos and graphic charts to explain. Well, how do you know that's correct? There's no audit of that. So the audited accounts, and if you look at Oxfam or Save the Children, these organizations, they take their accounts very, very seriously. These are detailed documents that explain everything. If when you read their accounts, you understand all their issues, all their weaknesses, all their failures, and what they're doing about it. You read a Muslim charity accounts, and the accounts after reading it just seems it's the best charity on planet Earth. Whereas the governance is weak, but it's a marketing document on this. We don't talk about, and every charity, by regulation is supposed to talk about risks and governance, but we don't do that. Right. Okay. The categories of spend. The Charity Commission expects all charities split their spending in two headings. Now, cost of fundraising and charitable activity. These are the two main headings. The way the Charity Commission sees all spend of all charities. Now, the Charity Commission recognizes that you have to spend money to raise money, and that's where the cost of fundraising comes in, and this is where the 100% donation charities, when you say 100% donation charities, what do you mean? Do you mean that you don't have any cost of fundraising? And this is where the argument then starts, right? The cost of fundraising is this admin or not admin? And then charitable activities, how much detail is shown in that? And that's going to be your major chunk of the charities activities, and how much is shown in the. Now, what's basically not clear, and the charity commission leaves that for the judgment for the charity, is overheads. Overheads for cost of fundraising and overheads for charitable activities. So now what happens that when you have 100% donation charity, and I've seen this an example, there's a charity with 50 million pound income, all their overheads were being charged to charitable activities. They weren't charging any, only a tiny amount was being charged for cost of fundraising. And they were getting away with it because their auditors weren't charity savvy auditors. They were, business auditors that had a few charity clients, only one big client of that size, and they didn't have those expertise to pick that up. And that basically what that does, that also has impact on zakat. Now, if you're basically not charging any, overheads to your zakat because you're 100% donation, and some charities are 100% zakat, then where are you covering your costs from? And I've seen this case in one charity where they had a 100% zakat policy. And in order to implement that 100% zakat policy, all sadaqah and all other funds, 90% of that was going on overheads. 90% of that was going on overheads so they can fulfill 100% zakat. Now, now, this is an exercise I did in one particular year. In future years, after, I didn't do the exercise after that, but after the zakat portion became bigger. Now, when zakat portion became bigger, that would basically logically mean that in order to implement 100% zakat, more than 100% of your overheads were being funded by everything else, by all other sadaqahs, funds. So when you have a policy of 100%, it has direct implications on the way you do your zakat accounting. And it's very easy because the thing is, the way the counting system works, it works on big numbers and small details get lost. And zakat is not, your 50, 60% of income. It's probably about 10% or 20% of the income, if not less, right? And that basically can really, skew the zakat analysis. If that analysis, if zakat is not looked at separately as an income and spend item, it gets lost, right? In that. And I've seen this case with a big charity where you had a situation. This is a big charity with big income coming in, tens of millions of pounds of grant income coming in. There's an emergency. Now, there's a mosque that's given you their zakat money. That mosque needs feedback, a feedback report. Now, your whole focus is implementing that project, or you're given a grant by a big institution and there's zakat money involved, and you need to deliver that. Now, the Joe Bloggs who paid his £100 zakat or paid his £1,000 zakat or less than that, that money stays where it is. It doesn't get spent. And I saw a situation in this, large charity where there were 3 years worth of zakat money that was just sitting there because it didn't get time, didn't get its turn to be spent because the whole focus was on the big items. Now, because nobody took a step back and did a zakat analysis, and that got missed. It's only when I kind of came and started looking at this, I realized that, wait a minute, and then from that, I had to create a new policy on project allocations in which I made sure that there was always room to apply those type of zakat funds. So we're always, using up zakat and we're only 1 year out, and not more than that. So and this is a charity that basically I spent £1 million on its accounting systems. So the thing is, right, that even bigger charities can, struggle with this, right? And when you don't have the right systems in place, and those systems are not tested to be accurate, and it's your assumption they work, then you can always end up making mistakes, not even realizing this is the case. Now, analysis of accounts, numbers and breakdown, how fundraising costs are funded, that's never shown, and that's where the 100% donations and 100% zakat comes in. There's a general comment, and when I, as a finance accounts specialist, when I pick up accounts and when I do my numbers, they don't add up. Because the thing is, now nobody will have the experience that I have. Now, how many, and charities get away with murder on this because it's all about, the marketing and like how you present yourself, and nobody goes into that detail. And and not going to detail doesn't mean that they're hiding something. It's just that because of not doing that detail, there's no mechanism of them self-knowing that they've basically followed the process that they should have followed to ensure that zakat was properly applied on everything. Now, another thing with the Charity Commission rules, netting is haram when it comes to Charity Commission, like rules. This is something the Charity Commission takes very seriously. So any money that you received, you can't take cost out of it. Now, because everything is cashless these days, so everything ends up in the bank and then you spend the money. But I have seen charities, because of pressure from 100% donation, 100% zakat, they do netting. They get money, they take off the cost of fundraising, and the amount that's spent, they apply 100% donation on that. No, that's incorrect. That is not allowed, and that's something that's bordering illegal with the charity commission. Now, the overhead policy, the zakat policy needs to talk about the overhead policy, on what your overhead policy is when it comes to zakat. This 100% zakat, that particular charity had a policy that they do not apply their overheads on zakat. Now, there's a gray area here. Certainly, every Muslim charity will have the right systems in place to make sure that that note, provides a correct figure because it's audited then. Because there's no requirement at the moment, this is something that's left on the goodwill of charities because donors, the donor feedback mechanism is completely, different from the overall picture of how the charity runs. Um, Now, when funds are transferred to countries, zakat is not shown separately. One transfer that covers all types of funds, sadaqah, zakat, lillah, mixing with zakat gives too much freedom to partners and country office. It may end up not being spent on zakat individual projects. I saw this one with one large charity, and the way their payment mechanism worked was that in their payment mechanism, the receiving country partner never knew how much zakat was included in the transfer that was made to them. Now, when the charity started, all their projects were zakat eligible projects, right? As the organization became bigger and the fundraisers came up with more products that were suited to donors, more attractive to donors, within those projects, non-zakat eligible projects started to come, which is fine. But then again, the country is now delivering, the same team is delivering those non-zakat eligible projects with the same mechanism that was in place when 100% of the project was zakat eligible. Nobody picked it up. Like the trustees are still thinking everything is fine because we've got systems in place and we can give a feedback. So we know that we gave £100,000 on we collected for education and £100,000 was spent on education. That education projects included, non-zakat eligible project, but nobody picked that up because there was no pressure from anybody to keep that separate. And then zakat funds compete against sadaqah grants, as I mentioned, and especially in emergencies. I had a situation where, um, uh, and this happens in emergencies, especially with large charities. I'll give an example of Islamic Relief Worldwide. This is quite a long time ago. And I think this was some sort of emergency in Africa. And I had a chat with the finance director, and he goes, look, we've differed giving us. They said, we'll give you £10 million if you can spend it within like 3 weeks, right? We don't have the mechanism to spend that much amount of money within 3 weeks. Now that was like a quite fascinating position to be in, but this does happen on a smaller scale as well, where charities may get a £10,000 grant from a mosque, or £20,000 grant for all, on those levels. There's pressure on that charity to deliver that project. Obviously, it's a big donor, and the whole charity system is basically focused on delivering for that particular donor. And what happens is the zakat that was collected from the public, that remains where it is. The time doesn't come to select that, and that basically gets rolled forward year on year, and that kind of like becomes a bigger figure and gets lost in things. And it's only when you have a zakat focus you can pick up things like this. And this is, maintaining a separate zakat fund to show brought forward how much we have, how much was carried forward, and the proper accounting, qualified staff with internal and external reporting. And zakat policy to show how zakat transferred to partners and country offices, the terms agreed and mechanism to check, and 100% zakat impact on sadaqah funds. So I've already spoken about this. Um, uh, right, okay, this is fascinating area. We spoke about direct and indirect when I spoke about overheads, but there's this important, and this is a Sharia implication issue. Beneficiary receipt versus use of funds, right? This is a bit of a technical point. So the Sharia scholar says that this zakat fund needs to go to this individual. So where's the zakat eligible criteria for this individual? Tick's been done. This person has provided everything that shows that this person is zakat eligible, right? Was the money transferred to this person? Tick. That's it. Zakat, obligation fulfilled. And this is how the whole charity system was set up. What happened is that the beneficiary basically was colluding with the supplier, right? Like, for example, this was about education, and that beneficiary was colluding with the supplier, and actually that money never went to the supplier for education. That basically, a supplier took the money, right, from the charity on behalf of that person and never delivered that education. And this was like, tens of thousands of pounds were spent because the charities, zakat systems never went that bit further, which is required by the Charity Commission on use of funds, giving evidence that this money was actually spent on the project that this money was given to. Because the Sharia scholar, it was about this person's eligible and the money was transferred to this education establishment. But the education establishment never delivered that that was never checked. Right. Now, from my point of view, zakat was never fulfilled on this person because, and why? Because the Sharia scholars, the zakat scholars, excellent on the fiqh aspect, but when it comes to governance, how the organizations are run, what kind of systems they need to have in place, don't have that background and experience. So for them, it was easy to give a certificate, everything is fine. But the use of fund side was basically, weak. And this is a common issue with relief charities, that because there's this whole race of raising money, and to raise money, you have to be able to give quick feedback to your donors, right? And feedback to a donor, it becomes like a marketing exercise. But the use of funds on what impact that fund is having, how, what was we spent £10,000 on a particular project, but what's the evidence that £10,000 was actually spent on it? Yes, we can see pictures there. We can see somebody's interview there. We can see a video there. But then these things can be exploited. Where's the receipt? Where's the invoice that basically shows that this money was actually spent on these suppliers to do this project? Charities don't sometimes go that far. And because they don't go that far, there's always this capacity of that zakat fund not being fulfilled. And this is why it's important that those systems of checks and balances for use of funds are in place. And if you're a charity that collects zakat, in my view, you're Allah's workers now. You have a bigger responsibility than any non-zakat charity, because this is a religious obligation that you now have this amana for. And this is where, in that charity, they had to change the way they basically operated to make sure that they had contracts in place with suppliers. There was due diligence done of suppliers, There was a funding agreement. This charity had a system in place where it can track down each and individual person zakat, got, and they were able to give direct feedback to the zakat donor as well. But they had no funding agreements with the education establishment. There was no proposals from them. There was no check to make sure that this money that we're giving is value for money and that they've got this ability to deliver, right? And they were happy because the Zakat Sharia scholar had given them a certificate and everything on this. Now, any questions before I go into my recommendations?
So, is a gift aid on zakat?
Yeah.
Can it be? Has to be the same rules for the gift aid, or can it be used maybe with the somewhere else, but not the zakat rules?
That's a very good question. Charity Commission view is that whatever gift aid that you get is restricted to that project. If somebody's given them zakat, on this, that money, the gift aid element, technically is, you can argue that it's tagged to that zakat because that, the bit of gift aid is coming out from your own taxes.
Second question is, when the people, there's a gift, the zakat project, which is spread over for 12 months. Most of zakat given in Ramadan. So what you spend now, but a lot of money you may need 10 months later, 11 months later, 9 months later. So that money can be invested in halal way, so it could benefit more, or because of zakat, you can't do that.
When you've given your zakat, you have fulfilled your obligation on that. So, there's no kind of like requirement that that money has to be spent within this period, right? Because it's all about giving the control over your money to somebody who's going to deliver the zakat. That zakat can take 12 months and can take even longer to deliver depending on that project. Now, that charity has an obligation to spend that money. You've given you £1,000. That £1,000 has to be spent on zakat eligible projects. Now that money is waiting to be spent. There's cash and there's reserve. It's like a glass and water in that glass. So you've got the glass, and in that glass, you basically write that bit is zakat portion and needs to be delivered eventually. But the water, that's like liquid. That doesn't have, it's not, that's not zakat or sadaqah or anything. That's cash flow. So for cash flow purposes, you can use that money. Right, but that zakat reserve stay there. Even if you've invested that money into, say, something income generating money in your accounting system, that liability still remains in the reserve. That never goes away. It's just the cash you're using. So when the time comes to fulfill that reserve, then you have to find the cash to basically fulfill that reserve. So I would say yes, that money could be reinvested because you're not utilizing that reserve. Yes, if you start to, tinker with that reserve, as in you don't have that liability anymore to deliver that project, that's when it becomes problematic. And my presentation with my recommendations on what are the things that for me that need to be in place to make sure that you're always compliant with your zakat funds.
Sorry, I was just going to ask Nasir. I know you've already touched on this, and you said that if we give our zakat to charity, for example, that our obligation has been fulfilled. But should we as donors be taking extra precautions and doing our due diligence on a charity before we hand over this money?
I often give an example of a meat shop. Do they have a halal certificate? Right? Do they look Muslim? There's nothing in there that suggests that this is dodgy. Is it clean? Right? Are they giving me good service? Right? Do I get a good feel for it? I'll go and buy the chicken, the meat from them. Zakat policy for me, I think should become now a minimum. It's not just a glossy document. It needs to be in more detail on how zakat funds are applied. Charities need to have, zakat standards that when we basically are dealing with zakat, this is our standard, and that standard needs to be audited by a third party. And then with every organization that deals with zakat, especially if you're £1 million above organization, you need to have some kind of internal audit mechanism in your organization. And you need to have an internal audit mechanism to always assure yourself, because it's not finding mistakes, it's also assuring that everything is fine about it. So any questions, any last questions that you would have on this? And I hope, this kind of like presentation did cover the areas that I started off with. So it was all about I'll go right at the start. So there's a debate on how Zakat is tracked and traced. So solutions to address common issues. It wasn't about criticism, but solutions as well. So it wasn't a Sharia presentation. And these are the areas that I covered. So if there's any questions, you can basically ask me now, or you can, email me, or email us, or when we basically give ask for, and please give us feedback on this presentation as well, and what more could we cover in future presentations, and how we can basically help as an organization on these Zakat matters.
Assalamu alaikum.
Yep, for example.
Can I just ask you quickly? I know you're trying to close this up now. Um, in terms of final accounts, a zakat donation which is not restricted by location or a project, it just says zakat. May it be zakatul mal or zakatul fitr or even fidya, that category. Let's just talk about
Yeah.
zakat. Sorry, the zakatul mal. Yeah.
Sure. Yep.
So zakatul mal, would that be restricted or unrestricted in the financial accounts as a first stage?
Yeah. So this is where the auditors show flexibility.
Yeah.
Some auditors are happy for that to go into general reserves, as long as it then ends up on, through the reserve transfers, it ends up into a restricted category, right? And that happens quite often with that type of accounting, and that accounting is acceptable.
Yeah.
Even the likes of Islamically Worldwide. Now, Islamically Worldwide is an excellent example, because their auditors have always been really charity special auditor. Their audit fee, Islamically audit fee, and I was the finance director, which did the tender and got those auditors.
Yeah.
£80,000 a year, the audit fee is. And
Yeah.
I basically was the finance director that led on that tender and basically signed over that was value for money audit fee. So when they basically do something, it means the auditors fine. And the auditors that they had were the auditors that actually wrote the charity SOAP as well. So, but then again, there are other charities that actually have a Zakat fund as a restricted fund. And what they do is that within the restricted funds that make those transfers, that's fine as well. There's no issue with that as well.
So have you ever come across a situation where Charities Commission have commented on this? A zakat donation which is not restricted by any specific project nor by any location. So, I mean, do they say that's fair treatment for it to be unrestricted? Unrestricted then means, I mean, in a charity sense, spent on almost anything.
Now, there's a bit of a technical argument. There's two aspects to this. There's one aspect is the counting rules. So the Charity Commission, there's a charity SOAP, right? So you
Yeah.
have to follow the charity SOAP. Now, what happens often is that when you had your zakat in your general reserves, and when you prepared your accounts, your reserves went into negative. When they go into negative, that actually means that money has already been spent. It just hasn't been allocated in your accounts. So technically, zakat has already been spent in your restricted reserves, and then you do those accounting adjustments to make sure it is. So for that reason, it was fine for zakat to be going to general reserves. But if zakat is spent, collected on a location or country restriction, then it offers a restricted reserve.
Yeah.
Some charities create a restricted reserves within there, and mosques specifically do that. And the reason why mosques do that is because if you think about a mosque, everything that a mosque does is not international relief, right? Everything is non zakat for them. So for
Yeah.
them, zakat is something very unusual. So in
Yeah.
those charities, they create a zakat reserve, and they basically every year they keep the income and expenditure on that. Now, in terms of me sitting down with the Charity Commission, I actually had a detailed meeting with the fundraising regulator on this topic. So
Yeah.
there were 3 issues that the fundraising regulator was concerned about. Was first, how often money is collected and advertised to donors and spent. The second thing they were concerned about was zakat on this, because they had complaints come into them. So I then gave them an insight, like I did in this presentation, of what it was. And now, because this is a hot potato, is religious. So they were like, "Oh my God, should we be looking at this, or should we not looking at it?" Because I sat with them, they became confident. They go, "Look, we're going to set up a committee and we'll involve you, and maybe we need to create a standard for Muslim charities or something separate." So there is something that I probably would pursue with them, because I feel quite strongly about this, that I think with Muslim charities is that unless there's a stick somewhere,
Yeah,
they're not
yeah,
really interested. So Jazakallah everybody for coming. I really appreciate your time on this. And please, Samraz, I put her email on the chat. Do give us feedback on how to improve the presentations. Jazakallah. So I'll end the session now. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum.